All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 10th of January, 2024, and this is the Cluster API Karpenter Feature Group meeting. We are a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which basically means please treat everyone as you'd expect to be treated, and raise your hand if you'd like to be called on. So I added a couple topics here to the agenda for this week. I think the first one's probably pretty easy. Maybe we can just handle that real quickly. Should we increase the frequency of this meeting? Because I think last time we were having some really good discussions and folks thought maybe once every 2 weeks was not enough. So what do folks think? Jack, you're +1 for increasing frequency. Anyone else? Yeah, totally. I'm kind of neutral at the moment because I feel like, I don't know, I guess like maybe we'll see how the rest of our discussion goes, but like, are we at, like, we've had some good discussions. Are we at the point where we need to go weekly on this, and maybe so, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, Jack, please.
If I'm the only one, I think that the nays have it. Maybe we can revisit in another couple months. What do we think?
Yeah, I kind of like what Cameron's saying in chat there. Like maybe once we get a repo, once we start to get to the point where we're organizing on code, let's go weekly or whatever. Because I'm not sure like we're quite there yet. Okay, so like let's revisit this in a few meetings or whatever. Okay, next topic. So, and this kind of goes right into what Cameron was just talking about, and maybe will help us get there. Do we, or you know what? I think like I skipped one there, which will lead into the next one. So orphan machine pattern and the infrastructure templates. This is kind of the direction that I've been investigating. And I think after our last discussion, it's starting to make more and more sense to me. The idea here is that we would try to implement a controller such that when a user configures Karpenter with the kind of provisioner information, they are able, or with the node group information, they are able to use infrastructure template names or identifiers as a way to signal to Karpenter what type of machines are available. Then on the machine creation side of things, our controller, when Karpenter makes a node claim using one of the infrastructure templates as the reference point for what to create, and I know Karpenter has the ability to kind of vary some of the parameters, so we'll have to figure out what that's about for our infrastructure templates. But let's just start with something basic. When Karpenter makes a node claim using one of the infrastructure templates, our controller will then create an orphan machine with that, and perhaps we'd put some sort of annotation or label on it to let it know that it's owned by Karpenter. So what do people think about that? Is that still kind of the direction that makes sense to people after having had some Christmas and holiday time to think about things? Or are there other ideas that we should get into? I see lots of thinking faces. So like in the absence of Jack raising his hand again, please, Jack, go ahead.
I was just going to say, somebody else raise their hand.
So, I'm like, a lot of my time right now internally at Red Hat is being spent like looking at this kind of question and this problem. So this is the area that I think I would like to start going in terms of investigating a code path. I've been looking at the Karpenter code. I've been looking at the example of how to create a provider, and I've been studying the providers for a long time. So like what I want to try to do next is I want to actually try to build like a version of this where we could see if we could start getting the loop going where Karpenter picks an infrastructure template with instance type data provided by the controller, and then creates node claims using those infrastructure templates to actually ask for activity to happen. I'm not quite sure on the removal part of it. I'm guessing that we'll have like provider IDs and whatnot that will help to make that easier, or at least direct for what needs to happen. Or maybe it's just a matter of the nodes get deleted and then, we need to make sure the machines get deleted as well. I don't fully understand that part of it yet. But are there any objections to going down this path and starting to creating this code? Jack, please.
Yeah, so no objections from me. I think this is the right approach. I would love to see a prototype of how this might look from a Karpenter integration standpoint, where we really we skip the whole Karpenter part and just create a machine with the fully exploded configuration, which is what I imagine Karpenter is going to do in response to a node claim. It's going to be yeah, I would love to see that. So essentially, if we can just on an active CAPI management cluster running one or more providers, just create a do like an end around, skip the whole machine deployment or machine pool part, and just create the infrastructure machine. So AWS machine, Azure machine, GCP machine, and confirm that works fine. I think that's how Karpenter would do it. I mean, I know a lot of these ideas are half baked at this point, but if we could prototype that, I'd feel great about this direction. So I'm +1 on the direction overall. I would just want to see some concrete evidence that it's not going to require ripping apart the guts of CAPI. That would be the major trade-off, is if we'd have to refactor CAPI. I don't expect that, but
yeah, I'm just going to respond real quick before calling on you, Cameron. This is exactly what I've been playing with the KubeMark provider. So like probably what I can do is for our next meeting, I can put together a demo and just show like where I got to there. And that should like provide confirmation of this kind of stuff. Cameron, please.
Yeah, no objections from me either. I guess I just would like some clarity around like what the primary goal or purpose of the machine is. Is it to provide users observability and insight into the state of the cluster? Is it because we have some operations that we think we want to apply to the machine that the controller is going to do? Is it because that's the expected way for users to manage these nodes? Like, I guess I just would want to understand what the primary purpose is so we can think about this clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I think kind of, yeah, like my thinking here, right, was that, and I think we talked about this, so I shouldn't just say my thinking, but the thinking that we had kind of arrived at was having a machine deployment or a machine set or a machine pool. One of the owner objects we had was going to make this just super complicated when it comes down to the heterogeneity of the machine types we want to create. So right. Yeah, so the idea would be is if it's easy for us just to create the orphan machines, and I'm fairly certain it is, but I will confirm it and create a little demo for us. If we can create those orphan machines and in some way tie them together with like a label selector or something so that that they're being owned by, kind of Karpenter or something like that. Then when a user is using a cluster API configuration with Karpenter running, they would be able to observe those machine objects as the way to understand like what's happening in their cluster. And, they would have that declarative interface kind of feel without getting without necessarily needing them, the higher level objects. And so now the real question is like, what does that mean for things like, could a user then delete a machine
Right.
or could they modify it? Like my expectation is that these machines would be mostly read only, right? That you want Karpenter to manage them for you. So like, yes, it's cluster API, but it's the Karpenter flavor. So like, Karpenter is doing a lot of that management for you. You're getting a window into what it's doing, and that's really what these API objects are showing you.
Okay. That's exactly the answer I was looking for.
Hey, I lucked out. Jack, please.
Can you defend the deletion part a little bit more? Because my understanding is that we actually want to delegate all these provisioning lifecycle operations to the existing provider implementations inside the CAPI ecosystem. So we don't want Karpenter, we don't want additional infrastructure specific logic to have to go into the Karpenter provider for CAPI, because then we're duplicating per provider that implementation surface area. So why wouldn't we just delete the CAPI provider machine? Say you've got an Amazon machine, AWS machine. Why wouldn't we simply delete that and rely on Kappa to do the infrastructure lifecycle cleanup work on behalf of Karpenter's observation of a scale down requirement?
Yeah, I mean, like I am not making a strong statement about the deletion. I'm just less clear on how Karpenter's mechanism for deletion is. Like, I haven't studied those code paths quite as much as I've studied the creation and metadata side of things. So like, what does Karpenter do when it wants to delete a node? Does it, or wants to tell the infrastructure to get rid of a node? Does it actually, I think there's like a delete. We could probably
Is the node claim durable? If the node claim has a one-to-one relationship with the lifecycle of the node, then the deletion of the node claim would refer, I would think, in our case, to the machine object.
Right.
And so the node claim would essentially garbage collect the machine object, which would then ultimately delete the underlying infrastructure.
Right. And that makes sense. And like that, okay, there is a delete call that gives it the node claim. So you're right. So like in this case, yeah, like we would have a node claim for a certain type of machine. Presumably that node claim is the one that gets deleted, and
that refers to the machine.
Yeah, and
object,
the provider ID is what it needs. So like we'll be able to link these things up because we'll have an orphan machine that will have a provider ID that will match to what's in the node claim. And then when it's telling us to delete the node claim object, we'll find the machine object and delete the machine object. And then I want it to work that way. I want to try and add as little code as possible to make this work,
Does that make sense to you, Cameron?
Yeah, that does. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay. So if we're all kind of in agreement about continuing in this direction, that brings me to my next question, which is like, do we have enough consensus that we should, start thinking about creating a code repo? And if so, like, what should we call it? Like, should we try and make a Karpenter cluster API or something in Kubernetes SIGs? Like, what do people think about this? Oh yeah, Jack, sorry. I keep looking down to type and then I look up and there's hands.
It's all good. I would say in terms of the consensus part, let's shoot for 100% affirmation in this meeting. Does anybody feel like we're not ready to go ahead and start creating a code project for collaboration? I'm definitely +1 on that, but I'd love to see if anyone else feels like now is not the right time.
Go ahead, Cameron.
I was just going to ask, are we going to be targeting a specific cloud platform or just generic?
I think like our goal here is to make a generic, right? So we're going to try to make it talk to the cluster API objects. And if we discover that there is something that needs to come from the cluster API side, then we'll probably have to step back and reassess. But that might be something that would have to come from like I think in the past we talked about this notion that there might be some contract that providers need to participate in to make this work, right? Like for example, the scale from zero capacity information on infrastructure machines, right? That would be really helpful because that information could then be used to tell to tell the core of Karpenter what is the shape of machine that will be made by this. Otherwise, we have no way to know, like, just from an infrastructure template, what is the shape of the machine that will be made, right? So when we come into situations like that, I think that's going to be material that will go into our, KAP that goes back to the cluster API community to say, hey, look, if you want your provider to work with Karpenter, there might be this API that you have to provide from your side so that the Karpenter controller can process it properly.
Okay, cool. That makes sense to me. I mean, I think we're at the stage where we can think about this. So
cool. Jack, please.
Yeah, I see it like what you're describing, Mike. Maybe some kind of a run. It'll be almost like runtime compilation validation where we declare something very simple that a provider can implement in its API to essentially declare its Karpenter awareness. And then at runtime, when you populate the appropriate Karpenter inputs, it essentially tells Karpenter CAPI plus this provider. And then there's some kind of a runtime validation that says, okay, I'm a management cluster, I'm running CAPI. Am I running this provider too? If not, I'm going to just fail that node claim because I don't know how to do that. But if I am, then we can get to work and we can do the proper sort of infrastructure delegation using the sort of known working provider specific infra implementations. I don't want to make it too wordy, but all this is in support of a single repo for CAPI. I feel like as half-baked as this is in terms of like we don't have an actual architecture yet or a prototype, I feel like we're close enough and we have enough confidence that I'm +1 on investing our initial set of resources on trying to make a single CAPI provider for Karpenter rather than one per provider.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. So it sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement here, even though there's only a few of us here today, but like, it sounds like we're in agreement. Do we want to try to propose this repo to Kubernetes SIG's Kubernetes-cluster-API or Karpenter because I think Karpenter-AWS and Karpenter-Azure are the names that currently exist. Is it still called Karpenter-Azure, Jack, or is it just called Karpenter in the Azure?
Yeah, it's called Karpenter let's see. I'm not sure if the AKS provider has changed, so I'm going to actually use the AWS as a reference because AWS did change their name, so they've established the pattern. And I want to say it's Karpenter provider dash.
Yeah, Karpenter provider AWS.
So, right, there's actually a couple paths we could take. We could take this path ostensibly under Kubernetes-SIGs in terms of the GitHub org. Or we could take the existing CAPI provider pattern and call this cluster-API-provider-Karpenter. So those I think are the two sort of mainstream paths we could take. Does that make sense to you, Mike, and others?
I mean, it does.
Because we're kind of straddling both frontiers here. Like, are we making a Karpenter provider or are we making a CAPI provider? We're kind of doing both.
Right. I think like for me, the first one makes sense because we're going to start with the Karpenter base project and we're going to use that. And then we're going to fork from that and then add our code in like to work because they've already got a controller set up that will like process the node claims and like has the interface to the core. So I think we would start there and then we'll fill out the controller part of it for what happens when when each of those, when each of these interface functions gets called. We'll fill out all this stuff basically.
I think I like where you're going. I think I prefer the first one too. Any other thoughts?
And I guess like, I mean, I could like alternatively, I could just create this in my own personal GitHub now, and then we could donate it to Kubernetes SIGs when we feel like we're at the point where we're ready to make that call. I don't know how heavyweight the process is for adding and removing repos. I don't think it is, but like, you know, like if we stake out Kubernetes provider cluster API there, and then it takes us a while to get going, no one's gonna give us any like feedback about that, are they? Like I don't know.
We can bring this up at Monday's SIG Auto Scaling and see if they want to sponsor this. I think you're muted, Mike, or your mic's not working.
Thanks.
Or
So
is it-
once we have that in
okay.
place, and we're starting to make steps towards like getting some like prototype going, then I think it'd be a great time for us to come back and say, okay, do we want to go weekly with this meeting now? Since we, you know, we might start to have like, it might turn into like kind of a code sync kind of thing. Okay, cool. Does anybody else have topics that they would like to discuss, or, you know, things they want to talk about or whatever? Or I guess we can take back about, you know, 6-7 minutes of our day here. All right. If nobody has any topics, then I will see you all in a couple weeks. Hopefully I'll see some of you on Monday at the auto scaling meeting. And yeah, we'll just take it one step at a time and figure out what to do here. All right.
Awesome. Goat herding, sheep herding, whatever. Great job, Mike.
Totally. Yeah. Well, it's like,